Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and our apologies for having to cancel this event last Tuesday due entirely to Eskom's failure to provide us with sufficient electricity. So it's fingers crossed for today. The crisis in sanitation in South Africa is not a new phenomenon. It has been worsening for well over a decade, judging by the number of reports, plans, and policy documents initiated by, amongst others, the CSIR, the State of Water and Sanitation in SA, as long ago as 2006, the SA Medical Journal, who said in 2009 that 85% of sewage infrastructure is debilitated, SAICI, through their State of Infrastructure Reports, Infrastructure Report Card 2010-2017, Department of Water and Sanitation in 2016 produced the National Sanitation Policy Draft. AfriForum Blue and Green Drop Report in 2019. The Helen Suzman Foundation 2019 State of Water and Wastewater Treatment. Human Rights Commission Report 2021. And of course, the annual Auditor General reports. All these reports and policy documents, drafted by eminent academics, economists, financial and engineering professionals, say the same thing, highlighting the problems of capacity, mismanagement, incompetence, and corruption, and putting forward remedies, yet little or nothing is ever done, except more reports and planning documents. No errant municipalities or responsible officials have ever been prosecuted or even held to account for this catastrophic failure of sanitation services. Some have even received promotions and been moved to other portfolios. The Responsible Government Department, DWS, themselves highlighted in the 2016 sanitation draft policy that 75% of SA's 852 sewage treatment plants, that is 639, do not meet the minimum standards. Of the 852 treatment plants, over 400 could not be assessed, and of the 203 remainder, only about 50% met the minimum standards. On the topic of skill shortages, seen as a major contributor to the crisis, it stated that in 1994, there were 20 engineers per 100,000 of the population. At the time of writing in 2016, this figure had dropped to 3 per 100,000. The department, however, took a positive step in 2009 when it initiated the blue and green drop assessments, designed to create a league table of the good, the bad, and the ugly in an effort where municipalities could be measured against national standards of water and sewage quality and implement measures to improve. This excellent initiative lasted all but 5 years, being abandoned in 2014 for reasons unexplained. But according to AfriForum, and I quote, the ANC government is trying to hide its incompetence by withholding information from the public and even from Parliament. In response, AfriForum have conducted its own blue and green drop assessments, and in 2019, of the 124 sewage plants tested that year, 65 did not comply with set standards. And they said, and I quote, a major concern is that so many plants are releasing sewage into our rivers. The dialogue goes on and is a consequence of the catastrophic failure of local government, attested to in the Auditor General's annual reports. We have a situation where government is not only the player and referee in the same game, but they also wrote the rules and scrapped the red and yellow cards. So what is to be done? Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. And it is clear that the politicians are incapable and unwilling to relinquish control to the private sector, who can provide the finance, management, and technical expertise as they would implement business principles to solve the problem. There is no shortage of technology, as we will hear. And contrary to the DWS report in 2016, there are many professional engineers and technicians currently unemployed who could be mobilized to project manage situations. The DWS report and policy draft of 2016 estimated that to fix South Africa's sanitation problems would cost 293 billion rand, and that was 5 years ago. So how much now? While spasmodic progress has been made, overall the situation continues to be dire, especially in underperforming municipalities, and those quite incredibly under administration. Does the National Infrastructure Plan 2050 provide a glimmer of light in this dark tunnel? Or is it the train coming to meet us? How do we eat this elephant? And at which end do we begin? The consequences of this calamity and what is to be done are the questions posed to our panel of experts. Our moderator is Benoit Leroy, who amongst other accolades is the CEO of the SA Water Chamber. Over to you, Benoit, who will introduce our panel members.
Thank you, Robin. Quite a depressing scene setting, but I'm sure we're going to try and turn it around, because I think we're sitting on the cusp, and I know it's election counting day today, but we're sitting on the cusp of major winds of change. Firstly, just from a format perspective, I want to thank Cape Business News and their sponsors, Mascom Water and Xylem, for sponsoring the series of events. This is the third one. We're going to have a panel discussion. We've allowed up to an hour and a half, and the reason for that is to try and make it as interactive as possible. And also, please flood us with questions and answers, and we'll try and weave them into our dialogue. But also, feel free to pose them at a specific panelist, so that we can address your questions, as we go. So if you allow time for that. Also, we've got until 4 o'clock for networking, which can be done immediately thereafter. So between the panel discussion and the networking, we'll have a presentation from our two sponsors, and then you can meet us in the networking platform. It's a platform run by an algorithm, and it does a one-on-one, I think, for about 2 minutes, and it's really names in a hat, but you'll be able to talk to the panelists and to myself, and to our sponsors. So please feel free to do that. Also, can get contact details if you need to. So what we're going to do is really set this in a little bit further with the NIP 2050. So it's the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, and that's the first major policy that was gazetted, because the Treasury White Paper by the previous Minister of Finance was not gazetted, but a lot of it's included in the NIP 2050. The Water and Sanitation Master Plan was published in October, November 2018, and the number was 900 billion rand. We talk about R1 trillion today because we live in an inflation environment. From a water chamber perspective, we see this as an opportunity to rectify 2 decades of underinvestment. And we'll talk about that. The poor sister in the water sanitation is always the sanitation side, but it's absolutely key. We have to address sanitation purely from a dignity perspective, but also from a health perspective. By keeping sanitation and sewage and the likes and these discharges under check, that's how we maintain the urban environment in a healthy manner. So the NIP 2050 looks at 4 pillars, and it's logistics, so Transnet and the likes. It looks at digitization of the economy as a whole, so from broadcasting to managing government and interfacing with business and mobile networks, internet. Then we have electricity. It's a no-brainer. But what is really surprising, and we've worked really hard for this for the last couple of years, we have water as the 4th pillar. And what's in there is key, is private sector participation is in there. The 2050, we've said, let's not talk 2050. Let's talk every 4 to 5 years. We look at you with an annual scorecard. That was part of our response. So, everybody's promising at COP and all this, that by 2050 we'll do this. those politicians, those officials are very often long gone, recycled somewhere else, etc. We need to look at things every year in tranches and take serious stock in 5-year tranches. The important part, the takeaway for us, I think, is that the private sector is invited, and it's invited to participate in all aspects of reinculcating water security, so water and sanitation security in South Africa, from funding to technology to project implementation and the likes. What is very different to our water strategy, in the past, it was really run by national government because big dams, interbasin transfers and the likes, those are dammed up, they're all used up. Where we're at the moment is that we have to reduce non-revenue water from 41% to 25%. I say we do it in 5 years. There's talk about 10 years. That's too long. So non-revenue waters, mostly the leaks, the theft is relatively small, reportedly in the accounting side. The second thing is reuse, and I think today we will see that that's the other low-hanging fruit, both from a centralized and decentralized aspect. And then the third one is new water, things like desalination and the likes. And all three of those are local government and not national government perspective. So what government has said in the NIP 2050 is that we have to capacitate local government. And so a national program office is being set up in the presidency, and with a national implementation agency that has been gazetted. So the TCTA for South Africa, not TCTA just for dams. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to view the private sector as part of that national support agency. So we know the municipalities in general are unable, even the metros are unable to achieve their mandates from a water and sanitation perspective. So we have to embrace the private sector's capacity. We do have capacity. And where we lack capacity, we will bring it in temporarily. I doubt it's from Cuba. We'll bring it in from countries that have water security. And we, in actual fact, are doing that. We've done it in the energy sector to an extent. We're doing it in other sectors. So there's no reason why we don't do it in the water sector. So without labeling the NIP 2050 too much, it's just the backdrop of where we're going. We think it's the most important, since the Water Act in 1998 was gazetted, the most important piece of policy to try and get us going forward. It's not a silver bullet at all, but to try and get us forward. So building on that, we have some real issues, and I think the issue in the Cape where no new developments because there isn't enough water and sanitation capacity being the biggest, I think the bigger issue than water is, and that happened at the same time, sort of middle of the year when the NIP 2050 was being published. We've had this problem in Gauteng for several years already, but I think it's important to look at that and just to show that it doesn't mean developments will stop. So I'd like to welcome Dion van Zyl, who is the chairperson of the Western Cape Property Forum. Welcome, Dion.
Hi, good afternoon, Benoit, and also to everybody else having joined us, the panel and the rest of the people without cameras on.
Excellent. So, Dion, what we're really looking at addressing in a nutshell is what are the drivers of the Western Cape crisis affecting further developments? And do you view that crisis as part of a bigger national crisis? And, what are your forum's proposed solutions or solutions that you've already embarked upon? If you could bring us up to speed there, please.
Yeah, thanks, Benoit. I think firstly, it's important to reflect that this election that we all participated in yesterday was in fact an election about infrastructure. And I find it rather sad that the popular media have not been able to link the lack of infrastructure and the lack of expertise to run infrastructure to the election theme. So we heard a lot of hot air promises by politicians about magically going to fix certain things. We had no debate about the municipal engineer and the role of the municipal engineer. I think that's the first point. The second point that I'd like to make is that the crisis that we're sitting in, you've quoted, both you and Robin have quoted some significant numbers, and having gone through the NIP 2050, these are all mega infrastructure elements being included in the NIP. They talk about a second phase dealing with municipalities, So municipality as concept doesn't feature on NIP 2050 at this stage in the first round. And that tells you a story. It tells you a story of government thinking that the solution lies in mega projects. And we've seen with the energy debate that mega projects, firstly, government doesn't have the money to deal with mega projects. And secondly, the rollout capacity of mega projects have shown, their own problems. So by default, we're sitting with a situation where government now is starting to reach out to the private sector and say, come and help. But what government doesn't appreciate is we don't trust government to take our money and to install new mega projects, right? We want to be players. We want to be in the room when we have a conversation, which then by default leads us to the discussion of what I call multiple smalls. Are we going to see massive desalination plants or massive sludge activated plants being built with private sector money? Not if we are not in the room. Okay, so either government gives us the keys to install these infrastructure projects and run them, or the private sector is not going to be in the room. So that by default, and bearing in mind that I'm talking from a private property development perspective, we are rushing, we are not walking, we are running down the line towards smaller developers, and I'm saying smaller now within municipal scale, actually just dealing with all the problems themselves. We are already generating our own energy. You just look at the futures industry on rooftop space, on malls and things like that. And we are now, from a Cape Town perspective, because the rest of South Africa has finally reached Cape Town, we've run out of sewage treatment capacity. We are now looking at individual development solving its own treatment capacity. But I've been thinking, what is the storyline that's starting to play out? Because municipalities are about utilities. That's its core business. It's its revenue stream. But what happens if the private sector says, guys, we'll do it in spite of municipality? And what happens when the people that can pay no longer need to pay for municipal utilities? And I think part of the discussion that we've got to be open about is really the discussion on reinventing local authority, because local authority in its current format is not going to be feasible, right? So when we have this discussion about multiple smalls, and as I say, the private sector is looking literally at going off the grid electricity-wise now in terms of sewage treatment capacity and the reuse of water, whether to potable standards or to grey standards, we've got to be realistic and say to ourselves, irrespective of political jargon about resilience, this whole movement that has been caused by the public sector failure is in fact going to be the death knell of the public sector going forward. So I'm fascinated in terms of where we are. Going forward, we've got to also be realistic and say to ourselves, but this whole movement is going to be opposed. It's going to be opposed by the people that have interests in political positions in local authorities and bureaucrats who need the revenue to keep on functioning as a municipality for its own purposes. So I don't think we must be naive. We've got to be very open-minded about what this journey is. It's a journey that's been caused by public sector failure, but I'm very excited that the private sector will be able to deal with this. And some of the other gentlemen in the panel will talk to us about technology. I have no doubt that we can solve the problem. I also need to just emphasize that the idea of multiple smalls is in fact a wonderful safety net, because you are not going to see single infrastructure failures. It's not a case of a single treatment package plant running out of capacity or breaking down and not. When you diversify, when you've got these multiple smalls that I talk about, you're actually de-risking. Right? And that is an extremely exciting phase for me, because it means that as an economy, we will become more resilient. We will have more and more layers in this, what I call a club sandwich of many, many layers. And by default, the failure of government is actually going to end up with a wonderful, resilient position. So the private sector is excited about it. We are cautious. We don't want to be double taxed. We already know that in the case of the city of Cape Town, if you install your own package plant, they still want to charge you development contributions. That's not fair, right? So we need to, and there will be some headbutting taking place on these themes. But if we are treated fairly, then the private sector will do its thing. On a positive note for local authorities, it will create spare capacity for them to try and sort out their own crisis. But in the meantime, I think even though there is failure, there is light at the end of the tunnel, Benoit.
Yes, thanks, Dion. It's in actual fact, if you look at the projects that are being rolled out, there's 7 PPPs in eThekwini alone at the moment. And the one that's a renewal from 21 years ago is the Southern Basin, where sewage, I think it's 40, 50 megaliters a day. So 40, 50,000 cubic meters a day, or 40 to 50 million liters a day of sewage is upgraded to a low-grade industrial water for Mondi and for SAPREF and Toyota. So for their processed water for cooling and rinsing and the likes. Cape Town Zandvliet works have been upgraded, which is a major works, I think up to 130 megaliters a day or something like that, of which 70 or 80 will be reused directly as potable water. Okay, so we're also seeing some mega reuse projects being developed by Rainwater in the Gauteng region, because that's the bulk water distributor. You know, from 4 of the cities, not all metros, but we're seeing a host of package plants being planned, put in, etc. But we've seen a lot of the package plants in actual fact outside of the big metros, and where there's been a fairly consistent lack of services. One thing just for us to bring to our attendees' notice is that water is a nationalized resource. So it belongs to us, and the custodian is Department of Water Sanitation, so they hold all the cards. And local government is the Water Service Authority and water provider. And so the authority is the district municipality or the metro, and the service provider is the metro, and then whoever's delegated in the local district municipality. That can be outsourced through supply chain regulations, either just O&M or full concession. So we're seeing a whole lot of concessions being planned. So the concept is, from a medium to large size, is to outsource it completely. Planning, funding, implementation, 20-year concessions. That doesn't help us with the small to medium, let's say, developments that can't tap into these resources because they're busy being upgraded, and this is where we need the package plants, etc. And we've seen in Johannesburg, for example, where they refuse to allow a certain amount of reuse. They don't have bylaws to address it. We'll talk about that now. And and it's above a threshold, because there are thresholds. So what's happening is you can't get a water use license. So, but as a private sector, yes, you're right. We have to push very hard. And this is why the independent water regulator is being set up, so that we can have not DWS as ombudsman, but an independent regulator to regulate these issues, where all parties are treated fairly, and not the bulk producer and custodian dictates all the terms and conditions. We have to have equity there, and that would cut across all 3 spheres of government. So local government will not be able to supersede the independent water regulator. So, but a lot of these things are happening, and they unfortunately take time. And if we don't keep the pressure, it's not going to happen, as quickly. I think it's important with a forum like yourself. I suppose you're networking. Do you have other fora in South Africa with similar missions and issues?
Unfortunately, the Western Cape Property Development Forum is rather unique in its form. Bearing in mind that we talk for developers, consultants, and contractors, it would have been wonderful if there were multiple organizations. There is CASA, Construction Alliance South Africa, which represents a broad-based construction sector, but in terms of the full spectrum, unfortunately not. Benoit, just one point, and that is the one thing that we've got to be acutely aware is this is a battle for revenue. Of course, water is the important thing. But we have allowed in South Africa basic services to become a revenue stream to sponsor other things. And technology now allows us to challenge that. right?
Yeah.
And when I talk about these mega plants, there will always be a need for mega plants, but at what cost and at what timing? The reality is South Africa is urbanizing around about 2.5% year on year as we speak. We will be 60-70% urbanized in the next 5 to 8 years. If you look at South America, if you look at places like Brazil, Sao Paulo, Rio, it's not something that's going to stop. And the reality is government cannot keep up at the pace of urbanization, right?
Yeah.
So I think when we talk about these PPPs, we've got to use this as a very broad term, because in certain instances, it will be cooperative projects. In other instances, it will just be government getting out of the way of the private sector to get on with it. And at the moment, I don't see a policy or a legislative context that speaks to the reality of South Africa, i.e. this incredible rapid urbanization, which is not unique to South Africa. It's a factor of the economy. It's a factor of absolute desperation at decentralized areas. I'm very, very concerned that the slow pace of regulatory change will end up with a situation where people do things in spite of government. And I think that's the reality that we've got to face. So when we talk about a national regulator, we've got to also remind ourselves, the president 2 years, 3 years ago promised us water use licenses within 90 days. The way that the private sector now interprets it is, well, if you haven't heard back from the Department of Water Affairs after 90 days, you just get on with it because the president promised us. Now, these are the realities which I don't think people in policy or in government always appreciate. And again, as I say, I'm very excited because small-scale decentralized tech now allows us to get on with it. And it's going to be interesting to see how government tries and keeps up with the private sector. The need for cooperation at these mega plant levels, no debate. But I think most of those examples you quoted in KZN, the private sector plays an operational role as well. It's not a case of handing the keys to the local government and saying, there's our cash. So, yeah.
Thanks, Dion. Gerard Cronje is the Managing Director of Mascom Water. We'll move on to you now, Gerard. I alluded briefly to the issue of bylaws, for example, and, I take Dion's point that a lot of people are going to make a plan, but generally speaking, the rule of law has to be adhered to as best as we possibly can and as how we interpret it. But how do you see, because you're operating as a company very much at the coal face at a municipal decentralized level, do you see the bylaws as conducive? And to me, the fiasco leading up to the potential day zero in Cape Town sort of woke a lot of people up that, do we have a bylaw? How do we control reuse? Is it black? Is it gray? Or do we need non-return valves and the likes? And also how quick is it, because Dion's talking about, these developments which take, let's say, a year to 2 years. How quick are you able to, in actual fact, put in your decentralized systems ready to these, let's say, medium to large project development initiatives?
Thank you, Benoit. First of all, if we speak about the bylaws, I think there's something that we all need to be aware of, and that is that no bylaw supersede a national law. Now, there's quite a lot of regulation already in the National Water Act and in the GA applications, etc., etc. And the bylaw merely will consolidate that for the municipality and then go further to include stuff like nuisance factors and other factors that may be applicable to the local authority. Now, the national legislation, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't stop anybody from treating wastewater on site. Some municipalities have now gone and they've done some work on bylaws, some haven't done it. But there seems to be a misunderstanding that the absence of a bylaw means you cannot do something. And I differ from that. The absence of a bylaw simply says that the municipality doesn't have a way to regulate what's happening within its boundaries. It doesn't stop you from doing anything specific. being it water, being it electricity, being it whatever. And technology is developing fast, and at this stage, government is playing catch up on it. If we look at the Western Cape, however, there are a few initiatives that's taken place. The one is the Western Cape government have done research on this from 2011 up until 2017. And in April 2017, they published a 400+ page document, which was sent out to all municipalities, recommending on-site treatment as a way of unlocking economic opportunity and bringing services to people. Now, the idea is never to replace a centralized network. There will always be a centralized network. We are rather looking at a hybrid here. Each one needs to be implemented where it is feasible and where it makes financial sense to do that. The fact is, if we look at the centralized networks and densification that's happening now, there's a lot of focus on upgrading municipal plants. Now in Cape Town, that's the only city that's acting responsible at the moment. And why I'm saying that is Cape Town stopped development on the west coast. They stopped development in the central south and the eastern southern suburbs because of the wastewater treatment works that are over capacity. I happened to be traveling through the country about 3 weeks ago, and just 2 towns that I drove through, the one was Kimberley. They have a sewage lake that is 1.7 kilometers in diameter. You can actually see it on Google Earth to the west of Kimberley on the road out to Danielskuil. If you look at Kuruman, their wastewater works are overflowing and create a waste stream of 3.5 kilometers into the veld. Now, where does that go to? All of that water eventually ends up in our groundwater. So we are literally polluting our own drinking water, and the municipalities don't have the capacity to deal with that. So at this stage, the capacity lies with private sector to make a huge difference there. If we look at Cape Town, coming back to the bylaws in 2018, looking at day 0, Cape Town published bylaws that says all new developments and all renovations where a building plan is submitted need to submit together with their building plan their water demand management system or alternative water system. Now, currently, this is unspecific, the alternative water system. That can be rainwater, grey water, treated wastewater, treated sewage, etc. But if you look at the developments that's on hold at the moment in Cape Town, if a decentralized system is installed, then that development can continue provided they don't discharge anything to the municipal network. But at the same time, the development will comply to the 2018 bylaws requiring developments to use alternative water for non-potable purposes, such as toilet flushing and irrigation. So that's already a double win for the developer. And then obviously you have the green economy that you stimulate at the same time. Because the entire world is moving towards the green economy, towards sustainable development, talking about, I don't know if you've heard of the Living Building Challenge.
No, maybe share it with us.
The Living Building Challenge is basically, by the way, the first building will be going up in Johannesburg, it sounds like next year, where the building takes care of its own needs. It takes care of its own potable water on site, being rainwater, groundwater, whatever the source may be. It takes care of its own wastewater. There won't be a sewage connection. And the design of the building is to minimize electricity usage, generate its own electricity. And basically, the living building becomes exactly what it says. It's a building that survives on its own without being connected to external infrastructure, obviously excluding communication, roads, etc. And this is typically where this kind of technology will come in, where you can treat your wastewater on site, you can recycle it and reuse it on site. Because what's happening with your densification is once the plants are upgraded, your next problem is your network. Because the networks were never designed for the population that we're pushing into the city in small space now. So the next thing, we've seen that in Stellenbosch, they spent, I think, 230 million rand upgrading their wastewater treatment plant, which is on the west side of town. Densification is happening on the eastern side of town, and they're now literally picking up the streets through town to build a new sewage pipe there. This is something that decentralized solutions could avoid, while at the same time it lowers our potable water demand. Now, there's been two interesting studies done by the University of Stellenbosch. The one, unfortunately, I don't have, but I met the person who did that, and that was Rejoice van der Walt. Her PhD was done on decentralized wastewater treatment and reuse. And I met her about 2 years after she did a PhD, and she said to me, Gerard, where were you when I did this? Because what I wrote about is exactly what you're doing already. I just didn't know that the technology exists. I said it must come. I didn't know that it exists. And then last year, another paper was published by Prof. Wayan Jooste and Amorey van Zyl, where Amorey did a study on Cape Town's water future. And what is applicable to Cape Town, I think, is pretty much copy and paste for the rest of the coastal region. And they basically said that there are 4 water sources for Cape Town going forward. The one is the current dam system, as we know it. The other one is rainwater harvesting, groundwater abstraction, and then on-site recycle and reuse. They looked at RO, and I think it was too expensive in the model that they did. I know there's new technology out there, and I don't want to debate that at the moment. But basically, they said Cape Town's water future doesn't lie in any of those 4. Cape Town's water future lies in option number 5. Option number 5 is a mixture of all 4. They said if we take one out, then we don't have a water future for Cape Town. Then we will have a run into water problems on a continuous basis. Now, rainwater harvesting in coastal regions is very interesting because whatever rainfall falls in the city runs out to the sea. So putting up a few tanks and keeping the water makes a lot of sense. But wastewater is the same. Even during day 0, Cape Town dumped 450 million liters a day of treated wastewater into the sea. And then we wanted to bring barges into the harbor to desalinate the sea. There's a lot of options that we could have done there. And a typical case study is what we did at the Department of Environmental Affairs in Cape Town CBD, where we treat wastewater on site and we flush the toilets with it. So we reduce the potable demand for the building, potable water demand, by 50%. And that recycling system delivers 100% of the toilet flush needs. So there's an immediate, you don't only solve the water supply problem, you don't only solve the sewage problem, but you also solve the infrastructure problem that we have. Especially if you look at Gauteng at the moment, where the problem is not availability of water, the problem is twofold. The one is infrastructure to get the water to the buildings. And the other one is that we're literally polluting our own dams if we look at the amount of sewage running into our dams. And yes, NIP 2050 sounds like a great idea, except for 2 problems. The one is NDP 2030 also sounded like a great idea, and now nobody talks about it anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. And the other problem is we have a problem now. Nelson Mandela Bay is set to run out of water within weeks. They said by December, most parts of the city won't have water anymore. We don't have 30 years to develop a plan for them. But we can implement something now, and that's coming back to your question of timing, Benoit. To build a system takes 3 weeks. To install it takes 3 days. So we can literally, within 4 weeks, make a difference on any site. You see developments takes 1 to 2 years. We can build those systems that obviously need to go in towards the end of development, just before occupation. So there's ample time to do that. But even in places like Nelson Mandela Bay, we can reduce the potable water demand by 40-50% within months by implementing on-site solutions. I'm not saying the one that we do is the only one. I'm talking about on-site solutions as a concept and not a specific product here. So we have, yes, we have a long-term plan that we need. We need to look at the 50-year plan. We need to even look at the 100-year plan. I think 2050 is too short-sighted. But that plan can only work if we look at available technology and we develop along with that technology. If you look, for instance, at what's happening with the electrical grid, there's so much available in wind power, solar power, and other alternatives, even hydro. But NERSA is limiting, and the national regulations are limiting what people can do, and because of that, we still have a shortage of electricity. And my question is, will we not end up in the same place with a national water regulator? Will we not end up with people being limited in what they can do, which result in shortages that brings about economic meltdown while we pay double-digit price increases every year? Because this is exactly what we're seeing on the electrical field.
Thanks, Gerard. So we've got the technology. Timing, we're way ahead of the developments from a decentralized perspective. So that's not a withholding thing or limiting factor. So yes, and the Nelson Mandela Bay situation is, they've played the fool there politically for 20 years. Now they will run out of water, and my suggestion to them was evacuate. Because if you need shock tactics, because if you start evacuating now, you can do it in organized fashion, unless it rains, and you haven't had rain for 7 years. So why would you have rain now? So the likelihood is low. Cape Town is very different. We know Cape Town does get the rains. There are cycles, and it's very close to, let's say, the anticyclonic system, etc. So, but Nelson Mandela Bay is in between the summer and winter rainfall. It's in that purgatory area, which is very high risk. And now you've got 1.5 million people who are facing, a day zero, and the media, generally speaking, is not really focusing there. Because we've had all these energy cuts and all the likes. It's even limited these discussions. But and I saw Nelson Mandela Bay actually singling out the schools as the problem for their water shortages. Now, I don't believe in fairy tales, so they must stop that. But it's industry cannot afford to shut down. There is plenty of opportunity to reuse water. Not only from industrial, but also from all of the domestic side, all government offices and all this. And like you say, these things can be done in a couple of weeks. So, will Nelson Mandela Bay be the first city in the world with more than 1 million people that actually has a day zero? And in those circumstances, if there is no water coming, what do you do? And they're living off the Harib transfer tunnel at the moment that has destroyed the citrus farmers to give the city an extra, I think, 60 or 80 megaliters a day. So, what you're saying is not only do we have the technology, we have the time to actually do it, but, there's still more than 3 weeks till December. So, hopefully somebody from Nelson Mandela Bay is actually looking at this. I'm not talking about the politicians, I'm talking about the officials who need to start jumping and get into action, because technology is not the issue. We're not going to have their desalination plant. I think it's April, it's going to be commissioned, but it's small. It's 15 megaliters a day. It's not going to make a difference. Wayne Talliard is the managing director of WEC Projects, and is involved. I think, they're involved in decentralized and centralized. And what was really picked out for this discussion, not exclusively, Wayne, is really the Nerida technology from Holland, because of its ability to retrofit centralized sewage plants so that you can stop the overloading, for example, reduce carbon footprint and the likes. And just a question from my side, maybe, or comment from your side is, could the Nereda technology that's linked to activated sludge be used on decentralized basis? So for plants that are below, let's say, 5 megaliters a day? Like to hear from you, Wayne. Welcome. Your mic is off there, Wayne.
Thanks very much, Benoit, and good afternoon to everyone that we can't see. So Nereda is in a very exciting technology. It's developed by Royal Koning DHV in Amsterdam, Amersfoort in Holland. And it's a technology that's seeing incredible global growth at the moment. Just last week, we had our global, what we call a community day, where all the companies like ours around the world that are implementing this technology meet to discuss the innovations and the applications that the technology is being utilized in. And it's really fantastic to see the traction that the technology is gaining globally. Its win and its benefits are around a small footprint and its low energy consumption relative to conventional activated sludge treatment technologies. And it also produces a very high quality effluent, which is typically better than you would expect from other treatment technologies. But it's not the silver bullet, which was a statement mentioned earlier. There are many technologies like this. There are alternative technologies from competitors of ours that can do the same thing that Nereda can do. But most importantly, it's the fact that we have the technology on a global scale. We have the technology on a South African scale. And it's really not difficult for us as specialists to solve the problems. In terms of your questions around retrofitting, very much so. There's a number of global examples, again, discussed last week, where existing infrastructure has been upgraded by 30, 40, 50% by the conversion to Nereda technology, utilizing existing concrete structures, existing treatment infrastructure, inlet works and the likes. So it's there. But it has a unique configuration. So similarly, as I said earlier, it doesn't match every application. So its unique configuration narrows it to a bunch of plants that would definitely be applicable, a bunch of plants that would be partly applicable, and then a number of plants that would just not be applicable at all. The comment on the package or decentralized solution, that was also very interesting. The UK have just implemented 7 of these package type decentralized units for the big water authorities in the UK. And these range from 150 cubic meters per day up to 800 cubic meter per day. So they're relatively small plants, but are able to apply the technology in a simplified way and achieve all the benefits that it would on a mega scale project as well. So back to the comment around technologies. There's lots. There's plenty out there. Give us the chance, and not just us. Give the specialists the chance to solve the problem. That's the key.
So Wayne, you're saying what we all know in the private sector is that we have the technology, we have the skills, and we can do it for centralized and decentralized package and utility and mega scale. And it's actually it's very similar to the energy situation where all the options are on the table. However, national government is blocking it. So national government is saying it's going to unblock it now. So all we can do, and we have to do, is hold them to account to make sure that we unblock it, because we are urbanizing. Even the population doesn't grow. We are urbanizing. We need housing. We need infrastructure. And people are not going to invest into our economy as much as they should if they're not guaranteed of water and sanitation, security, from our perspective. we were the first country, I think, in the world to have a National Water Act. Yes, we're water scarce, and that was 1956 and the likes. And you know, California's rushing around trying to get a water act together at the moment, you know, by the sounds of it. So we're pretty organized, and we've got reasonable legislation, but the compliance and the blockages are just unreal, you know. And I'm also talking about the blockages in the Western Cape, where we've got parts of cars and cattle and all this, but we've got them all over the country. It's not a Western Cape, you know, patent, but we're using and abusing our infrastructure. And as Dion has said, is that, you know, it's electricity, it's water and sanitation, and then it's equitable grants, well, the rates and taxes. Those are the source of revenue for local government. And if local government has no revenue, if it doesn't deliver, it collapses, as we see in Mfuleni, for example, and in, I think is it Grahamstown? But we've also got Harry Smith, we've got a whole lot, Putati Jaba too. But we have to have a balance between keeping the local authority alive, but also not inhibiting development and setting out the correct infrastructure whilst lowering not only our energy footprint, but also our water footprint. And I think Gerard's spoken about it, is that we have plenty of opportunities to, in actual fact, reuse. Even if you don't reuse black water, we can use grey water, but we also don't have to reuse sewage for potable. They said there's other low-hanging fruit, like the flushing, irrigation, and gardens. And talking about Kimberley, you know, that big sludge sewage dam that's outside the town. 15 years ago, the flamingos arrived and settled there. And when the sewage plant, the main trunk feeding it, broke completely, the flamingos started dying, and there was a big global hoo-ha. So, you know, out of a sad story of sewage all over the place, what happened is the flamingos arrived in what is one of the biggest colonies of pink flamingos, you know, in the world. And people only realized that infrastructure had collapsed when the baby flamingos were dying, which is really a bit strange. But we have no choice. We have to get our infrastructure together. I don't see too many questions, which I take it either we've made this too technical or we've addressed the questions as, you know, as we've spoken. Please, folk, post some questions or comments. Maybe to do another round based on what we've said here is, before we get to the presentations, is what would the takeaway message be? It's not doom and gloom, but there's a reality check. We need to understand where we're at, and we're at a fairly low ebb at the moment. But what do you think maybe are the quick wins that we can do? And yes, and the underlying statements, government has to play ball with us, and we will, as associations, do our best to keep government, accountable. Dion, we can start with you.
Yeah, look, in a perfect world, government would wake up much quicker, but this is a process. I think the key message for me is,
we've lost your sound there, Dion. No. Could I suggest, whilst Dion sorts that out, no issue, Dion. Gerard, maybe you want to give your takeaway story.
Benoit, there are a few things there. I think just coming back to Nelson Mandela Bay, if we have a town of 1.5 million people running out of water capacity or without being able to supply water to the people, we will have a civil war at hand. There is no debate about it. People need water to survive. You can get away without electricity. You can't get away without water. Then I've recently spoken to a major corporate. I cannot mention the name online, but it's a huge, huge corporate company who had to close their head office because the water in Gauteng has been disrupted for more than 3 days. They had a 3-day water backup system, and the water supply has been disrupted for more than 3 days, and they had to close their building and send their staff home because they could not flush toilets, and the stench of the toilets were becoming unbearable in the building. These are the kinds of things that can be solved with on-site solutions. And I see on-site solutions similar to the roots or the leaves of a tree. You never have one tree with one leaf that supply all the energy. You never have one tree with one root that supplies all the water and is the total anchor for the tree. By the same token, we don't have one city with one solution. There are many solutions out there that we need to incorporate. And we need to understand that the problems we have were man-made problems. Those are not natural problems. They were problems created by design. And we have the ability to fix that by design. The only thing that we need to do is to take off these flaps that we have that gives us tunnel vision. And that can create a lot of opportunity. Coming back to the income for municipalities that both you and Dion spoke about. It is very important to understand that if there's no water security, there's no industry, there's no job creation, there's no rates and taxes, there's no selling electricity, there's no doing refuse removal, so the entire financial model of the municipality will collapse. We've seen it in the Western Cape. We've seen the tourism sector being hammered during the drought, during the Day Zero campaign. And we're seeing it in Nelson Mandela Bay, where people are hesitant to invest there. So just looking at the water revenue or just looking at the wastewater revenue is short-sighted. We need to look at the total picture and understand what we're losing if we don't have water security. And then the last thing is the beauty of these kind of solutions is we are not dependent on government. In other words, we're not dependent on government finances. We are not dependent on government timing. We are not dependent on government decisions or protocols or tenders or red tapes or anything. What government needs to do is exactly that, govern. They need to stop controlling and start governing. They need to free up the space for private sector to develop in water, in electricity, in construction, in many other areas. Government should set the rules and then get out of the way, as Dion said, to allow private sector to continue and create jobs, to allow private sector to continue and grow the economy. We've seen government's failure with the so-called investments and infrastructure investments and a bloated ESCOM wage bill and a bloated government wage bill, and every municipality has a bloated wage bill. Employing more people by government is not going to solve an unemployment problem. Enabling private sector to do that is where the answer is. And this is one of the enabling factors. Bring about water security, bring about development security, because you see, the people that are worst affected by this are the poor. If you look at Nelson Mandela Bay, the first to run out of water are the poor areas. They will also be the last to get water again because of where they are located. If you look at Cape Town, with due respect, the MACO member for water and sanitation will have a very nice Christmas dinner with her family, while there will be many artisans and many laborers in the construction industry who won't be able to feed their children over Christmas, because construction has come to a standstill because developers cannot develop. We need to look at the entire chain. It's so often that people say, yes, but the developers have got the money and they enrich themselves and stuff like that. The same with the water industry. No, this guy just want to make money out of selling plants. That's not the main issue here. The main issue is the poorest of the poor are the worst affected when water and sanitation collapse, when infrastructure collapse, and when jobs are shed because development cannot continue. And we need to look at this as a total cycle. We need to look at this as a total humanitarian cycle, and then decide what is best to do for the entire population. And more regulation and more control by government and more central systems that they cannot maintain, I don't believe is the answer. I believe the answer is in a hybrid and the hybrid system, allowing private sector to develop and get the benefit. You see, in Cape Town, we have the nice part, if you use your wastewater on site, you reduce your potable water demand, and also your sewage charge is linked as a percentage of your potable water purchase. So that not the developer, but the development will financially benefit from that as well. And that is a typical way of how even the private sector can be incentivized. And yes, we need to look at local government. We need to look at their monies, where their money come from, but they also get a lot of money from rates and taxes, which are now falling away because the development cannot continue. And that's because of a sewage problem.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Before I go back to Dion, Mark is asking, do you think that the engineering consultants are always in touch with the latest technology? Wayne, if I could put that onto, I have my own thoughts. If I could put that maybe onto your table, what would your reaction be?
Yeah, Benoit. So, Mark, the answer is yes and no. So the consultants that are out there are consultants that are making a very concerted effort to familiarize themselves with the latest technologies that are out in the market, the new cutting edge stuff that is in the water and wastewater space, and they actually the really interesting consultants for us for us as a technology provider and our competitors to have conversations with. There are also are still stuck in the let's call it the cut and paste methodology, which is do what you do and what you know well, because we know that works, and because you're putting your stamp and signature behind it. It's the way you manage risk is that way, and that's also understandable and smart. As technology providers, it's up to the technology provider to educate the consultants around the technology that are out there that they're not aware of, and we try and do that, and we do that, and we successfully do that with a number of. That's how I see it.
No, thanks, Wayne. I agree with you, and also, if you look at the property developers are very quick adopters of technology. So it's a matter of the technology providers really canvassing them as much as possible. If you look at the typical concessions or triple Ps, PSPs coming out, the consultants don't drive the process, but the concessionaire, and the concessionaire has the consultant working for him, and the concessionaire has technology and access. So that changes it around a little bit, where the consulting role, we see it globally, is becoming more of an employer's representative or working in the consortium to do infrastructure engineering and the likes, but not necessarily the technology selection. So the market is I think, changing, quite a lot. And I think as we've digitized even more now, since COVID, I think we're able to propagate technology development a lot more, a lot easier. Dion, are you okay with the sound there for your closing remarks?
Let's try that, Benoit. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can hear you. Excellent.
Technology is actually a blessing in disguise, because it was appropriate that I listened to Wayne and Gerard before I gave you my final comment. So, two points that jumped out now. The one is technology changing, and the second one is the education of consultants. But I'd like to add to that the education of the regulator. I think part of the crisis that we're sitting with right now is communication, and a lot is lost because of the proverbial Berlin walls that are keeping people apart. We've got the commercial thinkers, the private sector, we've got the technology guys, the consultants and the experts, and we've got the regulators. And if you think of those three circles, the problem is they don't communicate. How is the regulator going to familiarize himself or herself about technology if he cannot talk to a supplier? But the supply chain methodology and thinking in South Africa has kept the technology thinkers and the procurers at arm's length, right? And therefore they can only procure what they know, right? Now, it's a chicken and egg. Where do we start? Because if you don't know there is something else out there to procure, how do you set up a procurement process to do that? Now, the theory goes that the consultants who's supposed to fill this gap between the total private sector thinker and government magically is going to communicate the fact that there is new technology. But the reality is government is procuring professional services at 30, 40, up to 60% discounts. So what engineer with a half a brain cell is going to put his proverbials on the table, having discounted his professional fees by 60%? So this is, Gerard talks about a life cycle thinking, and I think he's correct. This is really where the crisis lies, right? And we have got to, in South Africa, break down these communication barriers. We've got to talk to each other initially in a nice way. But I think this is, again, I started off by saying I'm actually excited because of government failure, alternatives are now on the table. And where we now, and this is where I talk to my constituents, the developers, the consultants, and the contractors. The thing that we've got to get our heads around is this culture of permission asking. Gerard correctly pointed out, legislation, unless legislation prevents or opposes directly, there is nothing that says you can't use it. And I think this is where developers now also need to start getting their heads into a different space, and that is technology is there to be used unless regulated out of the equation. And if it's not regulated out of the equation, then use. And the more experimentation we have, the more examples and precedent we have, and we are not going to succeed every time. Sometimes you're going to choose a technology that just doesn't work in the specific instance, but multiple smalls. Let's get 50, 100, 200 experimental plants out there. If 10% fails, it's not going to look like the Kimberley sewage crisis. It will be isolated. And yeah, nobody wants to promote failure. I mean, we're all very serious about our environment and the legacy that we leave. But we can fail fast in multiple smalls and learn from it. But guess what? If we have an 80 or a 90% success rate with this multiple small new technology experimentation due to government failure, well, guess what? We're going to be light years ahead. And, you know, listening to Elon Musk recently, one of the podcasts I listened to, he made the point. He said, he was asked, you know, you left South Africa, you went to America, you had success in America. Would you have been able to do the same thing in South Africa? And I think we all know the answer.
Very
right?
true.
So it's a culture. It's one thing pointing fingers at national government or local or provincial government, but the reality is we've allowed this culture to develop around us. We now have the crisis that is evolved with this. And so the question is, we are going to change direction. Are we going to do it in an embracing of new technology, or are we going to sit somewhere under the tree and just not do anything? Because I think Gerard's point is spot on. The reality is, if we do not deal with this crisis, private sector money will leave. And with that will leave the last couple of standing people with technology backgrounds. So this is a much bigger debate, Benoit. This is one of using the crisis as a positive. And the only way I see moving forward now is let's roll up our sleeves, let's experiment, let's learn.
Thank you, Dion. And before I go to you, Wayne, for your closing statement, just to reiterate, the Public-Private Growth Initiative was set up for exactly that reason by industry sector with the presidency to stop the war, to open the communication channels you're talking about. And we've made a lot of progress, but it's not demonstrable enough. So we have, for example, tens of billions of rands of various industrial projects waiting for water use licenses. And the president made the statement, we can do it in 3 months, but legislation doesn't allow you to do that. And DWS and the CMAs do not have the tools to do that or the capacity to do that. Okay, so now that is actually the biggest impediment we have, not to water resilience, but to unlocking investment from the private sector. So we discussed those things, and I must say, I'm very impressed with the level of commitment and experience and brain power in both the public and the private side there. The problem is it's a slow process. So what we've got to do is the PPGI, for example, and I'm going to suggest it after today, is that what we need to do is we need to have provincial chapters. We've got a national chapter, and we sit in Pretoria, in the government buildings, and we really have a lot of workshops and we get things going, but it's not quick enough. We need to have them in each of the provinces, and I think in each of the metros, at least. So I think one of the takeaways here is in unlocking this issue is the PPGI. It's not a silver bullet, but it is a very well structured. It's a lot of volunteers. It's very well funded. Okay, and the construction sector, for example, the automotive sector, the agricultural sector, have managed to unlock a lot of projects, and trying to address the construction mafia, because as we get bigger projects, the construction mafia hop in, on the punt. So, but it's a communication. If you're not talking, you can't do anything. So we do have that. So I think there is a National Property Association. I just can't remember their name, but Dion, if you email me, it's SAPOA. Do sit. They were one of the latecomers. Water was the 17th or 18th. And, we had to convince that water and sanitation lubricate the entire economy. So you guys can talk about all of your sectors. Without water, you can't do anything. And we had to debate that. And in actual fact, the presidency agreed. Okay. But I mean, that we had to debate it is actually quite sad. But we did it, we debated. So we do have these communication channels, but I think we need to decentralize these and package them into the metros so that it's closer to the ground also, because it's going to help with the issues we're dealing with here, I think, with decentralized. But having said that, Wayne, your closing statement, you've got the nice position. We've all said something.
Yeah, sure. I sort of want to, if I may, end on a bit of a positive note around
Please.
The conversations that we've had. So our company was privileged to be involved in the recent Green Drop audit process that has been implemented or appointed by government to take place. And we had the opportunity to go and see firsthand what it looks like out there. And yes, it's sad and paralyzing to see what the state of some of our works is, or most of our works are in. But what is very positive is the interaction that our people had with the staff on the ground at these works. So there is the resounding feedback was that the guys on the ground are really proud of what they do. They want to do well. They want to operate their plants to the best of their ability, but they're hamstrung by the levels that are 3 or 4 layers above them, where the decisions around the spend is taken, the fact that the money is not necessarily flowing to the places where it needs to flow. But the positive and the hope for me is that ultimately these people at operational level in these works are going to be the leadership at some point. And if they continue with that positive attitude and the pride and passion that they have for what they're doing, there is certainly hope for us getting ourselves out of this hole that we currently find ourselves in. That combined with consultants being fairly remunerated, allowing them to therefore evaluate alternatives, technologies, or just the structure of projects, the availability of new technologies from what is a competitive environment in the water treatment space. So it's a very competitive industry, and that's good for us. That's really good for us because it gives us options to get easy wins, and there are lots of easy wins. Modular Solutions, we've talked about that at length. Infrastructure that is shot, but with not a lot of maintenance, can be put back online and produce a water quality that might not be perfect, but it will be a damn sight better than it is currently. I think of things like biofilters. There's thousands and thousands of biofilters in this country that are not utilized, but put them back online, there's a pretty good chance we're going to get very close to where we need to be compared to where we are. So, yeah, there's a comment there about taking our head out of the sand. I think we all have taken our heads out of the sand as industry players. Hopefully, government will do the same, and it solves the crisis.
Thank you, Wayne. So, if I can wrap this up before we go to our presentations from our sponsors, and there's a question there that's a little difficult to address, but I'll get to it, is that the private sector is willing, has the ability, be it at a huge discount or not. I know consulting engineering is at 70 or 80% capacity, CISO is saying at the moment. So there's plenty of capacity, but the pie is not big at the moment, but we know that the pie is 10 billion rand. Now the question is, how do we unlock that? And I think government letting go of the 100 megawatt, which to me is only the first phase of renewables, that's going to open up the thresholds and the likes that we have and the stranglehold we have in water. It's up to us to push that, and let's do it through the forums that we have in our associations, PPGI, and of course the propagate these thoughts and these abilities. The private sector is not the government, so we should be operating, funding, designing, putting in all of this infrastructure, and government should govern, as Gerard is saying. That's a definition of the word. I think we got lost in the last 50 years, a lot of people in the world, a lot of countries, in that government started getting involved in business. We need to push back and let us get on with it. We have the appetite, we have the knowledge, we have the technology, and it's competitive. So you will get, the best prices, whereas government doesn't compete against itself, in reality. So it's very uncompetitive. But the bottom line, it's up to us, because government works for us, not us for government. And I think the voters have probably spoken. There's a question that came up from Clippies from Mfuleni, and he runs a business chamber there, and they have over 100 million liters so 100 megaliters a day plus of untreated sewage into people's front backyards, bottom garages, the veld, the golf courses, 44 pump stations not operating, and eventually to the groundwater and into the Vaal River system. And so the clip is saying here is from Mfuleni, how can we approach DWS seeing that Section 63 is currently implemented? With Rand Water permitting agent, we as a business chamber would like to play an active role. The Section 63 is where DWS, I think it's in the Water Services Act, not the Water Act, I speak under corrections, one of the two, takes over the management of the municipality that was under administration, but specifically for the water. DWS as the custodian moves in, constitutionally correct. And then what it does is it appoints an implementation agent, and this is Rand Water, who is on the doorstep, who's owed over R1 billion, and Eskom, I think, 2 billion rand. So they have a vested. And but you need 7 billion rand to, that's DWS's number, you need 7 billion rand to reinstate water and sanitation services in Mfuleni. That is more than the annual budget. They're collecting less than a third of their rates and taxes and basic services. So without money, you can actually do nothing. So, the chamber would like to play an active role. Yes, business needs to stay alive. It needs water. And I think the bulk water line there is losing 50% plus. It needs energy. I follow them very closely on social media, and there's water, electricity outages and explosions of substations on a weekly basis. People are out of basic services all the time. It's as bad as Southern Joburg. So I think we would need a separate webinar to address that and bring in, the government players, the local municipality players, Rand Water and the business chamber. Maybe that's something that that can be considered, but I don't think we'll be able to in this forum, because sorting out the Mfuleni issue is in actual fact the recipe to sorting out a lot of our lost municipalities, and there's about 110 of the 270 odd at the moment. Having said that, thank you very much for I think some some good points and sharing your thoughts. Gerard, are you comfortable if I go to Chetan first and give you the opportunity to close off with your presentation after him? Thank you, Chetan. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everyone. What a great discussion. Let me just get sorted out with the sharing. Can you guys see my screen?
Not yet.
How about
Sometimes there's a
now?
bit of a lag. Yes, it's coming through now.
Okay, great. So thanks everyone for what a great discussion on water sanitation. So many amazing points coming through. And I think there's so many opportunities from both a decentralized and a centralized approach that needs to be looked at. And just for the audience purposes, we know reuse is going to be such an important conversation through anything related to water sanitation. And the last session that we had, we talked about reuse beer, which kind of demonstrates the lens of how reuse water can be used in so many different ways, including producing a beer. But today's session, I wanted to focus more on something a little bit different around wastewater and stormwater solutions for buildings, because this will also lead to, obviously, water sanitation and how we manage these. My name is Chetan Mistry. I'm the Strategy and Marketing Manager for Xylem Africa. Xylem is a water solutions company, an OEM that's multinational and based all around the world. So from just understanding this business, the building solutions, we take a systems approach that everything plays an important part. So from design to product to how we're installing operations and maintenance, and these need to work together to actually have good systems in place. And our systems that we're talking to in the building solution space covers anything from wastewater to water supply, pressure boosting, HVAC, and treatment solutions. And today's discussion, we're going to focus primarily around wastewater and stormwater solutions. In this space, we know that there's huge challenges from this perspective, and this is predominantly driven by things like clogging, the bad smells that we might end up getting, the energy consumption in building environment. And these are coming from the multitude of uses that take place or environments that operate in the building space when it comes to wastewater. And these have to be managed by buildings. And this is very important that we do this in an effective way. So from Xylem's perspective, we have a holistic view as far as this is concerned, and our solutions cover quite a few components within this. So we're looking at from an energy consumption point of view, we're looking at from how do we actually pump wastewater, how do we collect the wastewater and how do we manage that, the drainage coming from stormwater environments, digital services that we heard so much about. Digital have to play such an important part in this conversation, and of course treatment and how this plays together. So all of these, as we mentioned before, need to work as a system, and it's highly critical. Just like the water solution, the water cycle itself is a system. How do we build our systems to make sure that each component is working properly, as well as servicing other components is highly critical for us. And therefore, we take this holistic approach as Xylem, as an organization, to make sure that we're solving water solutions in a holistic approach. And even if you're looking at these as from a decentralized or centralized approach, whether we're pushing back wastewater into the sewer system or whether we're going to be reusing that water, how we're managing wastewater is absolutely critical because it can make or break the system. Just like in any cycle, the weakest link can kind of make the whole system collapse. So we see this as an important facet, but obviously it's just one facet of the cycle. To give you a different view, these are the areas that we will be covering in the discussion. So from the pumping solution itself, to the collection of data, to optimization of the information, so that's through the digital services, as well as the controllers that we look at. So Xylem's world-renowned for both our clean water and wastewater pumping solutions, and we see a whole lot of technologies coming in this space. And we've just released a new product called the Xylem Concerto, which is by our main brand called Flight. This brand has over 100 years worth of experience in wastewater pumping solutions, and it's again world-renowned. And it's really the first intelligent wastewater pump system, and it's been designed with all our dynamics that are playing in today's world in mind. including all the unique situations of wastewater pumping. We're talking about the highly volatile type of situation of the actual media that we're going to be pumping, to its importance in the entire system. So things like how are we able to install the systems, the reliability of the systems, how do we maintain it? All these components have been looked at thoroughly to build a system to ensure that there's trouble-free pumping, as well as the good saving of energy, as well as making sure from an operational point of view that it is absolutely effective. Then without also understanding, we're going to have all our systems connected together. So making sure that our systems are running properly. We have a whole host of different types of controllers and monitoring equipment. This is to make sure that we can monitor and manage the different type of media that we have in wastewater. And this is to ensure that we prevent flooding, as well as ensuring the sanitation, and also from a bad odors point of view. And some of our markets where how we manage wastewater becomes a legislative type of environment, that's also a consideration for ensuring the proper controls are in place. Then we have a great digital solution. And this is obviously from both perspective of monitoring and assessing your system, giving you a 24/7 view. But this is for both reactive and proactive type of management of the systems, making sure that your wastewater system is effectively operating, and then also maintaining the proper way so that it is absolutely efficient and making sure that it's running effectively. In the digital services, it's mainly driven by our Avenso software, which can connect and remotely manage your entire system. So this is an IoT-based system, looking at how you're connecting all your different devices, making sure that you got all the data that comes up into your system from both digital and analog components. And it also supports non-Xylem products, because we know there's a plethora of products out there, and making sure that these systems are actually being able to be managed properly. And from this, we can get good early warning systems, alarms that can help you to respond to situations faster and help you to ensure that there's as minimal downtimes as possible, and therefore lower the risk of the system itself. And then proactively also to help you make intelligent decisions based on the data that's collected, so we can manage the systems holistically. In our case study here, we've seen that deploying the system in Port of Trelleborg in Sweden, they managed to have no operational shutdowns for 6 months of operation and no flooding events during the systems, even though it was retrofitted to their pump stations. So we have this solution that's applicable in the buildings environment, and we have similar systems that's both for scale in the public utility space, so that large treatment works or large builds in mining spaces where they're doing treatment, as an example, can also deploy similar systems with the same functionality to ensure that they can maintain their ecosystem, so to speak. Whereas Gerard mentioned that form these living buildings so that their systems can efficiently hold itself together and basically be a capsule on its own. So just as a summary, so this was basically built, these systems that we build are basically to bring peace of mind to our customers through a reliable wastewater management system that covers all the components of the waste management, from the product itself, how do we operate it, how do we install these systems, as well as the efficient management of the systems itself to make sure that we have the right outcomes. So this is in a nutshell from the side of Xylem, how we can offer these world-class solutions to anyone out there who wants to deploy solutions that aid water sanitation. Come and talk to us. This is just the tip of the iceberg on how we can help the community build these effective systems. If you'd like, you can go and visit our website, which goes and dives deeper into the complete building solutions network that we have. Please have a look and touch base with us, and we'll be able to engage with you on various solutions. Thank you very much. Back over to you.
Thank you, Chetan. And very, very useful presentation. What really picked my attention was the digitization of the water, and I think that's a very important tool. So talking fourth IR, and our Deputy President is a really big fan of the fourth industrial revolution, and the water sector being fairly conservative and slow moving. although we can be fast moving, as we've heard, I think digitization is a very important factor, and it's the fastest growing subsector in water and sanitation in the world, and but not in South Africa yet. So I think we're not far from that, and that's really going to help us to have this mix of, you know, centralized, decentralized, small package, offsite, onsite, and I like that term from the living buildings, you know, approach. And you know, the building can only live if it has water and energy, and then people in it, you know, to do our services. Thank you very much, Chetan, and thanks for Xylem for your sponsorship, without which we couldn't have these networks. You can visit Xylem in the expo, and you can also network with Chetan. And thank you very much. We're going to move over to Gerard Cronje from Muscam Water. Thank you.
Thanks, Benoit.
Thank you, Benoit. You see, what Chetan does and what we do actually go hand in hand, because of we do and they do the pumping and monitoring and everything else that goes with it. So that's actually a very nice system that can go together. Benoit, if you can just confirm for me if you can see the slide.
Coming through perfectly. Thanks, Gerard.
Okay. In coastal regions, most of our treated effluent runs to the sea. Now, that is something that we can change, obviously, by design. Most of our rainwater also end up in the sea. Inland, the water systems that we have normally discharge to the rivers, and we know the pollution that's happening there. While if you look at Gauteng and those regions where water supply is inconsistent. So both of these can be addressed if we look at circular material flows, and this is exactly what on-site treatment is. So the traditional thinking was the linear approach, where we catch water, treat it, use it, discharge it, and then it goes to municipal wastewater treatment works, and we discharge it to some other water course. Now, with the circular approach, we recycle and reuse on site, and we only discharge what is really needed or what is really not needed to the municipal system. Now, some people say the thinking is inland, if you don't discharge that to the river, then there's less water in the river for people downstream to use, so you actually have a negative impact on them. And I say no. If we recycle and reuse on site, then we abstract less potable water from the dams, and we actually have clean water that we can release from the dam into the river rather than untreated sewage. So it's actually a net positive effect for the people downstream as well. The fusion system, I'm not going to talk about the technical side, we don't have time for that, but basically consists of a bioreactor which is installed underground, an electrical panel that supplies power and monitors the system, and an air pump that supply air as well as do the water routing through the system. As I said, I'm not going into the technical side there. The outputs of this panel can easily be incorporated into a remote monitoring and remote management system or a building management system as well. If you look at the Department of Environmental Affairs in Cape Town, you can see it's a high density area, high density building with little space around. And not only is that a problem, but access to the building is a problem. There's no industrial doors or anything to walk through. And we literally had to carry systems through the building. So 4 small plants were installed rather than one big one, simply because we couldn't get the big plant through this building. And we're treating wastewater 2 meters away from the boardroom of Department of Environmental Affairs. There's no odor nuisance, no noise, and the water is used for flushing their toilets. So that's reducing the consumption of that building by 50%. And as I said, in places like Nelson Mandela Bay, this is where it can make the difference, reducing the building's water footprint by 50%. In Gauteng, it can allow you to keep your building open. Basically, there's a heater tank that supplies water for toilet flushing. All the wastewater is discharged to a lifting station in the middle of the ground floor. And when the tank level drops, it will demand new water Raw sewage is transferred through a treatment plant and then lifted back up to the header tank. So 100% of the toilet flush water is running on recycled water for the past 2.5 years now. The system can be installed in public open spaces, so developments don't have to lose valuable land to cater for on-site treatment. Here you can see the plant just installed. That's a few years later. It can be installed in walkways that you can see a commercial building there. The hospitality industry, farms, houses, lodges and tented camps. There we do 30 kiloliters a day in Namibia. Here at school, Bloemfontein, what you see in the middle here, I don't know how clear it is on the net, but there's water halfway up that glass tube and the other half not. And that is the treated effluent. That's a photo taken with my cell phone 3 weeks ago when I visited Kiro School in Bloemfontein, a sample of the treated effluent there. And that effluent is used for irrigating their sports fields. Above ground installations are possible. We box them in. Multiple installations and growing with a development is possible. So phase 1 will get their treatment plants. Phase 2 will do the same. Phase 3 will do the same. And as the development continue, we literally just add on, which is also a cash flow benefit for the installer, for the developer. In informal settlements, we can give dignified sanitation rather than these chemical toilets. And you can actually collect the grey water as well, treat it, and have a net positive effect, water effect for the community, and they can use that water to their benefits. That's a mining village, the treated effluent on the right-hand side. A restaurant where you literally walk over the plant to use the toilets and to irrigate the gardens with treated effluent while you're having your meal there. And that restaurant's been open with this system now for a bit more than 3 years. Kango caves, where they're saving 3.5 million liters a year by treating on-site and reusing. That water used to be wasted before. Frolocate Nature Reserve, with this water is also used for flushing the toilets in the buildings, as well as irrigating the gardens around the accommodation. The Whip Nature Reserve having 3 of the systems, purely from a waste management point of view. Bunny Park, Benoni, you can see Benoit talking about the bylaws. In the case of the Kango Caves and Bunny Park, those systems were actually purchased by the local authorities, purchased and installed by the local authorities to solve certain problems that they have. And then in cases where you really don't have water, the municipal waste line can actually be a water source for non-potable water for irrigating sports fields and other non-potable applications, or with further treatment like ultrafiltration or reverse osmosis, it can actually be taken to potable water. Again, like in Nelson Mandela Bay, this is an option on a small scale where you extract wastewater, treat it on site, put it through a secondary treatment system to take it back to potable water and give water to the people that don't have at the moment. So the circular water economy, basically meaning whatever you discharge from the building, we treat and then either put it back for toilet flushing or use it outside in the garden for other non-potable applications. That's a typical layout, more for the professionals, what the system will look like. And just a bit of background on what has been happening, and a lot of people are not aware of this. So Western Cape government, this is an excerpt of the letter that they sent out in 2017 saying wastewater treatment closer to source becomes a cost-effective and energy-efficient alternative. So that's already being supported from a provincial government setup as well. Cape Town bylaws that I spoke about, new developers must provide for the installation of water conservation and demand management systems or alternative water systems for non-domestic purposes. This is a typical case where you will comply with these bylaws as well. Green Cape has published a case study for off-grid sanitation at the Kango Caves. And then when you do apply to the City of Cape Town, make sure that you include this on your building plans and that you specify the size of the system as well as comply with SANS 10400 Part P, which tell you that the system should not be within 2 meters from all buildings or boundaries. So our problem, as I said, was created by design. Let's solve it by design. This is a complete game changer in the economy, and I briefly just want to touch on those points. How we can actually have an influence in the economy with something like this. And we need to look at this more inclusively. Don't look at the plant, but look at the total economic cycle. So there is sales, servicing, and installation of the systems that bring about job opportunities, that bring about economic growth, local economic development as well. Can also be BEE related. New developments can continue, bringing again jobs and money. It brings about water security, which bring new developments. Health is a very important one. If you look at the communities that currently use chemical toilets, for instance, you can solve a lot of health issues by offering dignified sanitation rather than the pollutive situations many a community live in. So dignified sanitation will bring more healthy people and fewer visitors to the clinic. Less absenteeism for people who employ, companies who employ people from those areas as well. So there's a long-term monetary benefit even for the companies. Local government, you free up capacity in their network, so that will allow new development continue. They can collect extra money from the new developments and there's more employment. Positive environmental impact. It's one of the very few alternative water sources that doesn't take anything out of nature. It's water that you have, you treat it and you recycle it so you don't take anything out of nature. And it's a perfect example of circular material flows. Benefits for the end user. This is one of the cheapest alternative water, starting from as little as 3 Rand per kiloliter to treat on site. And for the local authority, means the reduced potable water demand, means there's less funds required to upgrade water infrastructure. That's the one thing we haven't even touched on. So besides looking at the income stream, it's also saving on the expense side for the local authority. And again, with development continue, there's more rates, other services that they sell, so there can be additional income for the local authority by allowing this. Allowing retrofits, again, you free up space in the network, which can allow more development to continue, so the municipality can collect more money from the new developments without having to fork out money on infrastructure. Improved water security will attract more investment. We've spoken about that. And midstream, we've done a case study on that, but unfortunately, due to political coalitions changing that system, or that project fell flat. But where the local authority would actually invest in midstream harvesting and treatment of wastewater using a small plant, and they sell that treated effluent back to the community as non-potable water. So the community buy the water for cheaper than potable water, and the municipality make money, where currently your waste stream is a cost cycle to the municipality. They now can turn that waste stream around and it can become an income for the municipality. So that's one of the ways we can actually address the monetary issue on this for the local authority as well. And then honeysuckers. A lot of the municipalities, especially in the smaller town, they subsidize honeysucker services. So honeysuckers cost them money. If you do on-site treatment, they can do away with that cost-sucking, literally cost-sucking exercise. And there can be more money available in the budget for other services. And chemical toilets, this is a lot cheaper than chemical toilets as well. So for professionals, Benoit, coming back to your question, I know Wayne answered that, but I've seen 3 kinds of professionals. The one that says there's money in casting concrete, I will cast concrete. Those who support green and alternative technologies, but then also a few that are hesitant because of the professional reliability they may have for taking on something new. So let us help you with the design of the best alternative water system. Plumbers and other contractors, we can help them grow the business by adding sustainable water solutions to the product offering. And if somebody wants to start a new business, I think water and power are definitely areas to look at for new business opportunities. So with that in mind, thank you very much. I hope that especially the case studies and the different thinking, how this water actually has an impact on other sides of the economy, will free up thinking and will free up the way we move forward. I think it's Einstein who said the thinking that got us to this point is not the thinking that will take us out of it. So let's change the way we think, and we can solve solutions together going forward and securing a nice future for our children and their children.